Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I'm going to give you guys a bit of another Hearthstone rant. I want to talk about the big issues that Hearthstone is experiencing. I think on one hand it's just very important to be constantly vocal about these things. I know some people might perceive it as complaining and this and that, but this is a game that we really loved playing for years and years, and I feel many different aspects of it are going downhill all the time. And I think being vocal about this stuff, creating the conversation, is important to at least creating a slightly better situation in Hearthstone. So the first thing I want to bring up, I do have a little bit more perspective and knowledge on the subject from the last few weeks of my experiences playing Un'Goro, but of course the first main problem in Hearthstone is RNG. RNG is a very large problem, and it has many different aspects that are worth talking about. So one thing to really understand is that in card games, RNG just naturally occurs. You have a deck with cards, you draw them randomly, and often when you run out of cards, just getting very specific ones at very specific times when you really need them makes and breaks certain games. So even if you had a card game with no RNG cards or effects whatsoever in any case, you're still going to have decks that are never going to go 100%. You're still going to have players that are never going to be able to win 100% just because it's a card game. Card games just naturally have RNG. Hearthstone design philosophy is that they want to have, in addition to that, cards with RNG. So not only is there the aspect of normal randomness of card games, but also that games feel generally different. And over the years, we've seen more and more cards with random effects introduced into the game. And I think we've actually reached kind of like a problem state. So in Arena right now, we have Mage, we have Rogue, we have Paladin, and then no one else really wins very much at all. And my recent arena stats, I have 0 or 1 loss against all the other classes in the last few weeks, except for Priest, because Priest does a really good job of killing slow decks and a really crappy job of killing fast decks. But, you know, it's kind of like polarized, and the top 3 classes are just crazy dominant. And even those 3 classes, even with Priest, are heavily controlled by random cards. And there's a lot of issues with this. The core of the problem comes from the fact that almost all, in fact, cards with random effects have an average random effect that puts the card on a higher power level of like cards. So, we always talk about like Shredder versus Yeti in the old times, but, it's much more extensive than that. We have cards that generate random mage spells, like 1 mana 1/1s, or spells from your opponent, I guess, instead of 1 mana 2/1s or 1 mana 1/3s, and the average result of that is just really crazy when you evaluate the weight of such a card in the late game. It gets even more than that, like with Primordial Glyph, such an insane card, right? You go from, you put Primordial Glyph in your deck, and the result of that is playing it on turn 2, your opponent can start to expect 1 mana board clears. He has to play around a 5 mana Flame Strike. He has to play around a 4 mana Meteor. It's literally impossible to play around this stuff. And that's the core of the problem. The core of the problem is that Hearthstone being a strategy game, in the very traditional strategy game, when you lose, you want to have an experience where you learn why you lost. Either you learn a new type of strategy your opponent used, or you gain more knowledge of how to avoid the perils of, the last experience that you had with your loss. So it becomes, Hearthstone has become a game where the random effects just control all of that. So, if you lose because your opponent had a 4-cost Meteor from Primordial Glyph, that's just nothing. You just lose, right? The next time you get Primordial Glyphed, are you going to play around 4-cost Meteor? No, you can't. The odds are that you shouldn't play around any one spell. But then your opponent might have the one spell in any given scenario later on in the game, and it costing 2 mana on top of everything else just means that you're totally shit out of luck. And it's very similar with Rogue card generation. It's very similar with Paladin card generation, largely with Discovers, and similarly with Priest as well. I was actually ranting about this topic the other day on stream, and as I was talking about it, we had Priest play a card with a random effect, a very impactful random effect, 7 consecutive turns. So, like, how good your deck is matters a lot in Arena. How good you are as a player seems to matter a lot in Arena, but all the losses are just bullshit RNG. You don't learn anything from them, and more importantly than that, it creates a net negative experience because RNG has become the norm for Hearthstone. It's so rare that RNG will create a memorable positive experience. However, when you lose to RNG, you get a memorable negative experience. And the ratio is not even close to 1-to-1. So the fact that RNG cards exist in the game, on average, creates a negative experience for the players that play Hearthstone. And I think that is basically all the proof anyone should need to know that there is too much RNG in Hearthstone. It just dictates everything, and it's ridiculous. And having played Hearthstone for such a long time and knowing about so many different aspects, just throwing all that stuff in the garbage because everyone needs to play random cards because random cards on average have the most powerful effects, and the random cards basically eliminate all that knowledge and experience from any relevance. And yeah, the outcome of the randomness effects just seems to dictate the outcome of almost every game that you play. And that's crap. Especially considering that it is by nature a random game as it is a card game. So yeah, that is a bit of the issue. One more thing that I learned playing these last few days is that random cards are actually the simplest ones to understand. I always thought about why it takes less and less time for people to figure out which cards are good, useful, good in certain situations, figuring out the meta, all that kind of stuff. Un'Goro has been, pretty good. I mean, we're about a month in, and we still have, the rare deck coming up that's actually pretty strong, and that's pretty nice. But still, that's going to be about it. We have, a 1 month in the best case scenario constructed cycle out of a 4-month cycle. So right now, the metagaming constructed is pretty good. There's a lot of decks and stuff, but in 2 months it's going to be the same thing. In 4 months it's going to be the same thing, and you're going to be really sick of it. Don't believe me? Just reflect on what happened in Mean Streets of Gadgetzan. A few weeks in, I was pretty bored of it, and people after about a month started realizing the exact same thing, and when we were on the 4th month of Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, people thought the game was in the worst state it had ever been. A large part of this is, well, on one hand, Blizzard really forces archetypes and synergies and all that, but these cards with random effects, there's actually very little thought and insightfulness about these cards. You take a card like Babbling Book, you just kind of weigh the average spell, and that's it. You know how good the card is. It's obviously good. You put it in every deck. There's not much in terms of combos. There's not much in terms of strategy. You just know these cards are good because it's so easy to understand the value of a random effect, which really kind of cheapens the game. We have more cards of random effects that are being played, particularly in Arena, than ever before. The top of Arena is really screwed up as a result. In the past, we talked about how bad Warrior is in Arena, how bad this other class in Arena is, but really, it's how well the top classes perform and how fun it is to play against them. And right now, it's really not that fun at all to play against them, and a lot of problems come from that. The other aspect that I have touched upon in the past that is actually tied to this, because I think the main way that you overcome just too much randomness, too much of the same thing. The stale state of the game is just by changing cards up, changing formats up. I think what Blizzard really could do is just constantly change cards from the base and classic sets, cards that a lot of people have. Just buff them, nerf them every few weeks. Just constantly do it to keep the meta fresh in Arena and in Constructed. I don't know if they'll ever come around to doing something like that. But if you don't do it specifically on those, if you're just changing other cards, or if you're pumping out more and more cards, which seems to be part of the strategy right now, it touches upon the other really big problem in Hearthstone, and that is the cost associated with it. So, they upped the price of packs. They made it so there's more legendaries that you can possibly get, and they made it so you need to actually have legendaries in almost every deck these days. Even the aggressive decks use legendaries, and again, that's a real problem for people who don't have that much or any money to spend on the game. And they're coming up with no more adventures. It's going to be just pack expansions. And they're coming out with more pack expansions. Like, the overall expansion rate is slightly higher. Just everything seems to screw over people who try to play the game on a low or a zero budget. And, that might just be how things are. But having played a lot of the other card games out there, that is just not even close to how things are in other card games. I really think Hearthstone needs to take a serious look on this, and it really brought this to light when I saw a poll regarding the statistics of the last Heroic Brawl. So the last Heroic Brawl was the Wild Tavern Brawl, and these Heroic Brawls cost 1,000 gold to enter, which is absolutely ridiculous if you ask me. The only way you get 1,000 gold back is if you get 12 wins. That's it. And some people are like, yeah, but Krip, you have to count the number of packs that you get in terms of, well, yeah, if you do that, you basically break even playing Arena at like 2 or 3 wins. Give me a break. That's not how you do that at all. The Heroic Tavern Brawl is just ridiculous. People want to play these things. People want to explore Hearthstone, but they are literally prohibited by cost. This is the poll I was talking about. You have to keep in mind that this poll was done for Reddit users, and you have to think that people who visit the Hearthstone Reddit actively are probably more informed and better than the average player because they are more informed. So even with that audience, which you would imagine would play a competitive format, 60% completely ignored it. 24% didn't play it, watched a ton. Who cares, right? 6%, it was awful. And 2% at the end, it was okay. And the good ones, 3%, it was great. 3%, it was absolutely amazing. And, if you're like the optimist, you're like, hey, look at that. Some people really enjoyed it, and maybe some people just didn't have the cards to play. But you really have to think about Hearthstone in its core. Hearthstone's a very high variance game where someone who's really bad can just go in a tournament style format and just win by chance. If you're below average player, you're still going to beat a good player 30% of the time, 40% of the time, even if it's 20% of the time. If you stack that up against, 6 or 7 consecutive games, people who don't think they're very good at Hearthstone might try Heroic Tavern Brawl and get like 10 wins because they just got really lucky, because that's just how Hearthstone works. They go to this poll, it's like, yeah, it was great. So basically what this tells me is the few people that got really, really lucky and did like a couple of brawls at best, just were really happy with their results and thought the Tavern Brawl was good. Basically what I'm saying is, nobody thinks this Tavern Brawl is good. Nobody. People are interested in it. They're watching people play it, but they do not want to participate. The only reason that could be is because it costs too much. Whoever's in charge at Blizzard of trying to balance the value and the entertainment and the pleasure people get from playing the game versus how much they should spend in terms of time and money to play the game is really failing. Like big time. And this is a big problem because the main way that you actually fix a lot of the other problems in Hearthstone, as I talked about, is by changing up and introducing new content. And it seems they kind of missed the mark with all of those things. So, yeah. Is Hearthstone a good game? Yeah, it's a pretty good game. Was Hearthstone a better game in the past? Yeah, I think so. I think Arena right now is in quite a lot of trouble. I think Arena is still okay. I had a lot more fun playing Arena in the first month of the expansion. The amount of fun you have playing the first month of anything is just outstanding. Hearthstone, when the expansion comes out, it's the best game ever. I lose sleep being excited to play the game. I mean, that is crazy, right? And then, 6 weeks go by, and it's just okay. It's nothing special. So Hearthstone needs to create more of those scenarios where people are excited to try new things because there's actually new things to try, and they need to do that while it doesn't cost them more and more and more and more. So, yeah. Let me know what you think. I think I've laid out all the issues hitting Hearthstone, at least in the last little while. So hopefully you guys can comment on it and maybe add a bit to it. Hope you guys enjoyed my rant, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.